we will get through lesson 2, but we're going to finish lesson 1 and start 2 tonight. Just for the men that are here, if you want, Dustin and I, from now to the end of the year, are just going to rotate teaching Wednesday nights. So Tim said he would do Sunday morning along with somebody else if they want to volunteer and just teach every other Sunday. So if you would like to do that, just let me know and I can change the schedule and let Tim know as well. All right, so number 4 here of lesson 1, considering John 2:13 through 22, what does it mean to be consumed by zeal? So for starters, we will flip over there and read that. So Janet, if you would flip over to John 2, and we'll read it and just work our way back, the usual 2 verses apiece. So John 2, and we'll go 13 through 22. 2:13 through 22.
Oh, 13?
Yeah, starting 13, and we'll go through 22, just 2 verses apiece.
Now the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. And he found in the temple those who sold oxen and sheep and doves, and the money changers doing business.
And making a whip of cords, he drove them out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen. He poured out coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. And he told them who sold the pigeons, "Take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of trade."
His disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." The Jews then said to him, "What sign do you show us as your authority for doing these things?"
Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and I will raise it again in 3 days." They replied, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you're going to raise it in 3 days?"
But he was speaking of the temple of his body. Therefore, when he had risen from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this to them.
Okay. So, a passage we're all pretty familiar with. So before we get into answering the question, verse 17 is a quote. Then his disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house has eaten me up." Anybody know what is being quoted there or where that came from? Correct. Psalm 69 and verse 9. So quoting the Old Testament, quoting a psalm by David is where that came from. All right, so getting into the question, what does it mean to be consumed by zeal? Don't be so zealous to answer the question, everybody. Consumed by zeal. What do we think that means? Dustin, is your hand up, or you gotta watch it when you put your hand up there? All right, go ahead.
Driving force your thoughts, your actions, what motivates you to do what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you ever been so consumed by something that maybe there's something that needed to be done and you were just so tired of it, so passionate about this has got to get done, that you just went about it? Like nothing could have stopped you from doing that at that moment. That's Jesus here was consumed by zeal. Why was he consumed by zeal?
They were using his father's house as a store, selling, trading. Not right.
Yeah. So he had such a strong desire to defend his father's house that he was consumed by that zeal. So did Jesus go in and politely say, "Hey guys, if you don't mind, I'd appreciate it if you do this, do this outside, don't do this in here"? Nancy, then Janet.
No, because, and some of the other reasons, he had seen it over and over and probably said something. It's at the point where you've gone too far.
Janet?
I mean, righteous anger.
Righteous anger?
According to Scripture. I mean, if you just wasn't mad, I mean, Yeah, I guess he was angry, but I mean, it wasn't out of control. I mean, as far as I guess it turning up, but it still is according to Scripture. I mean, it was not a sin.
Okay? I'm so glad you said that. All right. So, what does it say he did?
Turned over money changers.
He turned over money changers, but there's something else in there that a lot of times we have a tendency to skip over. He made a whip of cords. So, a lot of times when we think of the whip, we think of when he was crucified. He was whipped with, I believe it's called like the cat of nine tails, that has like the 9 different cords hanging off of it, and they usually put rocks or shards of glass at the end of that. Now, I highly doubt he took the time to weave shards of glass into this, but he made a whip of multiple cords. Anybody ever, had been hit by a whip or towel popped or anything like that? Okay, towel pop got everybody.
It doesn't say that he actually hit anybody.
It doesn't say that he didn't, or that he did, but it doesn't say that he didn't either.
Yeah, I don't know if we should.
Mallory?
I don't think he had to hit anybody because he used it to drive them out.
Right.
Back to your pop thing. When I get come out with it, I hightail out of there because
Right.
I don't want to get hit. He's trying to die. So the actual impact doesn't have to happen for it to be effective. It's the idea of that's gonna hurt if it hits me. I'm gonna get out of here before it does.
Okay.
I mean, even sounds weird. Our kids know, fly swatters. They don't want to get hit by a fly swatter. You get it out to hit a fly or whatever. They're like, no, I'm not gonna get swatted by that. Let's go run around crazy.
Ours electrocutes.
Huh?
I said ours electrocutes.
Yeah, we don't have one of those but it's anything, any projectile at a very young age. I don't want to get hit by whatever someone else is swinging. So I think it was a very effective tool. Whether or not he hit somebody wasn't the point. It did the purpose. It drove them out of there.
Okay, Nancy?
And and a lot of times when you whip those whips, it makes a noise. So they know what that's for.
Steve?
While the whip is intimidating, I don't know if you've ever tried to get oxen or livestock to move. Not oxen to move, but
Livestock, yeah.
hard to make animals move without something to get them going that way. And a whip is what they probably used back then anyway, or
Yeah.
whatever. That was his tool for getting the animals out. I'm sure the people probably ran when they saw it too, though.
Okay. So, a lot of assumption in there, because fact of the matter is we don't know. Did he make the whip for animals? Did he make the whip for driving people out? Did he hit anybody with the whip? Did he not hit anybody with the whip? The fact of the matter is we don't know. We know that he was justified in his anger, and getting a whip like that, it ties right in with the anger that he experienced. So we know he didn't do anything wrong. He didn't sin. Tony, and then I think Mark, did you have your hand up as well? So Tony, then Mark.
The first thing he did is he went in there and he got everyone's attention. And once he had everyone's attention, then he used that as a teaching moment. Because he had everybody's undivided attention. And when he done that, everybody was looking at him. And then he used it as a teaching moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Mark?
Well, logically, as I think about it, we know this: Jesus did not sin. And, hitting people with a whip. Now, I don't know how, I'm not sure you have Moses, but our back, that would be assault. So I'm going to say, if I had to hazard a guess, like you said, for sure. If I had to hazard a guess, I would think that the whip was for driving livestock, like Steve mentioned. And once you get livestock moving, everybody moves.
Yeah.
So, like I said, I know, regardless of what happened, I know Jesus committed no sin. So that's all I guess.
Yeah. So we know, I think we can all agree, we don't know for sure how it was used. We have our assumptions of how it was used. And there was, even if it was used on animals, there's still the threat to people of, hey, here's a guy with a whip that's clearly upset and enraged about something. So to Mallory's point, it's still, I doubt they felt peaceful about him having a whip. Like, oh, he's just using it for the animals. We'll just, slowly make our way out of here. So I say all that to ask the question. We've clearly established that Jesus did not sin in what he did here. He came in, he flipped the tables over, he threw the money, he whipped the animals, he had a whip. Does this justify and give us authority to use physical violence when spreading the gospel? And I know we all kind of sit there and laugh and think about that, but there are a lot of people out there today that feel that that's 100% justified, is physical violence will help further the work of the gospel. And if people aren't willing to believe not the gospel, so to speak, but believe my religion, then I have every right to attack them. I have every right to kill them, threaten them, behead them, blow them up, whatever I want to do. So does this give us justification to do those types of things, Misty?
Oh, first of all, you're using this as justification, but I think you're missing the point. These weren't people he was spreading the gospel to. These were believers. He was correcting an error. Big difference there.
Okay, so you open up another can there. Somebody here's in sin, and we know it, and they're not willing to repent. Does that give us justification to bring physical violence to them to get angry with them, to get in their face until they make it right with God? Okay, and we say no. Why not?
Because we have other instruction on how to handle it.
There we go. So obviously, I don't think anybody here for 1 second, or anybody that's perhaps watching on the internet, believes that that's the case here and that's what's happening and it's giving us justification to do that. But at the same time, I don't think it's necessarily something that we can just skip right over. Because as I mentioned, when back to the original kind of question, everybody said, oh, he was flipping over the tables. We do have a tendency during this passage to skip the part about the whip. And I think it's something that it's not mentioned for nothing. And so I think it is something that you have to talk about. And the fact of the matter is, there are religions out there today that believe that physical violence and things just like this are absolute justification to get people to their way of thinking. And to Janet's point, this is clearly not put there for our instruction on, hey, here's how to go about things. He was justified in what he did. It's also, what's the other thing about this? What's it under? He's under the old law. So it's a completely different set of rules. What were some of the rules under the old law that we don't have today? What if a child disobeys and is disloyal to their parents? They're killed. So again, completely different set of laws that he's living under. There were things, blasphemy, death. Disobedient to your parents, death. There's probably not many of us that would be alive today if that were still the case. So we have to keep those types of things in mind as we go through this. Nancy?
Well, with the whips, like Tony said, it got their attention. And usually if you're going to start driving people's livestock out, you're going to chase for that livestock so it doesn't wander off anywhere because it's your livestock.
Yeah. I mean, that's their money leaving as those things leave, because that's what they were doing, was they were there selling all that to begin with. Mallory?
So I don't really know the right way to phrase this, because I don't want to say Jesus was ineffective, but when we try to use this as an example that, oh, we should do the same thing, these Pharisees, they didn't change. So all of the different methods Jesus did, it's still up to that individual. So I think that, we can't just be like, oh yeah, no, we need to go storm all these denominations and drive them all out. That didn't do anything. Like,
right.
It brought their attention to that very one moment, but the next day, they're out to seek him and kill him anyway. Like, it didn't change their heart. It didn't,
yeah.
It just drew attention to that one thing. But if Jesus couldn't, get them to self-examine, how arrogant are we going to be to be like, oh, we can go and do this and have different results?
Yeah.
We can't think that way.
Absolutely. And I think I appreciate everybody's thoughts and comments on that. I think we hit that hit that pretty hard, but I do think it's something that we don't need to just skip over. So, second part of the question here. Jesus doesn't call the temple a building. He calls it my Father's house. What effect does this personal connection have on his zeal? Amy?
I think anytime you personalize something, that increases your connection to it and builds it. It's sort of like when you see tragedies happen on TV, like if you know somebody that was there or have like some sort of personal connection, people like that tend to feel it deeper. So if you can make a connection to like your faith more personally, you're more likely to be more zealous about it.
Nancy?
Well, it was his father's house. God showed him from the beginning what to build and how to build it. And Solomon put it together. Of course, it was torn down and then later rebuilt. But that was God's house.
Yeah.
No matter how you look at it.
So, Mallory?
I think also, though, you have to remember, the Israelites viewed God as their God. They didn't have a very personal relationship. So, first of all, to even have someone else come in and say, this is my Father's house, that's a different type of relationship that they had never been exposed to before. That was never a relationship with God. That was very much a distinctive, like, God and us, not for family or any sort of, like anything, like personal type of relationship. So, to have somebody come in there, even just use the word, my Father, it's very obvious why they thought he was being blasphemous. That was a whole new concept, and I think we take it for granted now. Because we do have that relationship.
Yeah.
For them, that was never exposed.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I'll speak for myself on this. So, if I got a call that somebody was doing something to my dad's house, I would be there to defend that house, defend him in a heartbeat. And we have to keep in mind that's the relationship God was his father. And so for him to see, if I go to my dad's house and somebody's spray painted it and vandalized it and all this stuff, I'm going to feel a certain way about that. But then not only that, we keep in mind back to what we talked about a while ago, this is the old law. So to the Israelites, was the temple the same to them as this building is to us? No. What's this building to us?
A building.
It's just a building. And a lot of you here have experienced your building burning to the ground. Was that unfortunate? Yes. Did that cause heartache? Yes. But was it as devastating as the temple being destroyed was to the Israelites? Why was the temple why should it have been so much more important to them than selling stuff in the temple? Why did Jesus feel it was that important, and why should they have felt it was that important? Janet?
God dwelled there.
So take what you said and Mallory said and put it together. That's their connection with God. You've got the most holy place. That's when you think God, when the Israelites think God, they think temple. That is his dwelling place. So to Mallory's point, they don't have a one-on-one relationship like we have today with the scriptures. And they had all these people, priests, that were doing all of this stuff that we can do today on behalf of them. And so this was their connection. So they should have felt as strongly about it as Jesus did.
In my mind, I've got it in my mind. It's just hard to say what I'm trying to say. I mean, the Godhead itself, Jesus is part of that Godhead. And so, to me, it's like, this is my Father's house, but how about my house too?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, if I'm saying that right,
No, absolutely. There was certainly they should have had a connection to it because they're Israelites, and especially as Pharisees, they're religious leaders. But Jesus, it was that much more of a connection to him because it's his Father's house. All right. Anything else on that before we move on to the next question? Okay. During this visit to the temple, Jesus shows his great concern for purity in worship and his great disgust over the greed and dishonesty of the money changers. What did he show zeal for when he visited the temple as a child? In Luke 2:46. We're not going to flip over there and read it because we're all familiar with it.
He was learning about his father's business.
Learning about his father's business. So, how old was he?
12.
12 years old. What kind of led up to him being found in the temple?
He wasn't with his parents.
Yeah.
The yearly feast or Passover, and they left and didn't realize he wasn't with them.
How long was he MIA for? 3 days.
Yeah.
So he knows the connection to the temple. He knows how special the temple is to his religion. But we also have to keep in mind, not only is he the Son of God, but who else is he? He's a man. So he's a man. He's an Israelite. He, as an Israelite, has that connection as well. And so he knows this is where I need to be. This is where my father's business is. So it's something he's known from a young age, that this building is something special. It's something set apart from just a standard building. Where for us today, where is the I think how to phrase this. Where's the special meeting place for us today as Christians? Our hearts. So it's not this building. It's not this building. It's us gathered together, whether we're at Sharon Place, is that it? Sharon Place, Tina and Warren's house, here. It doesn't matter. That's where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name. That's where it's important. Building is not significant in that, or the library.
I think the big connection for us today, Jesus went to a building and said that's where the teachers were, that's where we went to study. For us, it doesn't matter where we go, so long as we get together and study.
Mm-hmm.
We put this much effort into our ability to study and into our desire to study. We teaching our children that. I mean, how many small kids, they like going to Bible class, but how many want to do that kind of stuff at home or on a weekend or, play on the playground?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a very good point. We've done the Friday night Bible study before, and that's not a potluck get together hanging out after services. We're there for. Now there's some time we take for that, but we're there for a study, and when we're in that study, that should be our focus. That should be our our main concern and main point there. So, all right, the next section, he offers a suggestion to pray as you're going through the lesson about some of these things specifically. It's kind of geared more towards an individual basis, so we're not going to do that here right now. And then live. Memorize Titus 2:14. This is a small but powerful step in devoting yourself to be one of the zealous people Jesus came to create. Anybody memorize that? I did, and I forgot. I can't memorize like I used to. So that is something. I don't know if there's any additional of these, but I do think it's something that we would be good to do as we progress through this, is actually look to, we're not going to go around the room and make everybody say it, but look to memorize these things. So Janet, you said you've got it written down, so if you want to go ahead and read that for us.
Who gave himself for us that he might redeem us from every lawless deed and purify for himself his own special people, zealous for good works.
Okay, so how does that affect us and impact us, or should it impact us in our zeal?
The fact that he gave himself up for us.
Mm-hmm.
That alone, and we have a hope of heaven.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody gave themselves and gave their life for you, I think you'd be pretty zealous
you want to spread that so that other people have hope.
Yeah, I mean, you think about Cheryl as an example. She's not here tonight, but you think about she just got a liver from someone. You think she's ever gonna forget that? Think she's ever gonna forget that person? No. But Christ, made the ultimate sacrifice for us and gave his life for us so that we wouldn't have to. All right. 3 for 3 on promises that we're going to get done with a chapter or a lesson. So, lesson 2, we got about a little less than 20 minutes here. Where did we get to reading? Kevin, if you would, just read there paragraph 1 and 2 there for us, that first section, if you don't mind.
God often used metaphors to compare complex spiritual concepts to familiar ideas. For example, John 10 describes Jesus as the great shepherd and Christians as his sheep. Because metaphors build on people's existing understanding of concepts, They are a rich and memorable way to convey a lot of information. To describe Christian zeal, God uses the metaphor of intense heat. In this lesson, you'll explore the significance of this metaphor and develop an overview of the components needed to build a spiritual fire.
Okay, so this chapter we're talking about the fire triangle, which is not a term I had ever heard before, but makes sense when you look at it. So what is a metaphor, Amy?
It's a comparison between two unlike things to create a greater depth of understanding.
You're clearly an English teacher. Okay. So that is what a metaphor is. I'm not going to try to repeat verbatim what she just said, but that is what a metaphor is. And so he talks about goes into this, that he uses zeal and describes zeal and compares it to fire. And we're going to, as we go through this, see where time and time again through the Bible, both the Old and the New Testament, we're going to see that fire and zeal have a tendency to go hand in hand. Steve, if you would read Zelos, I'm assuming is how you pronounce that. Oh, Janet, it's Greek, you know?
That sounds good.
Okay. Steve, if you would go ahead and read, there's that paragraph and then two more on the next page, please.
In Lesson 1, zeal is defined as a burning desire to please God. This is because the English word zeal is the translation of the Greek word zelos. According to Strong's Greek dictionary, this literally means to be hot or heat. Therefore, the word zeal carries the idea of a desire on fire, and zeal can accurately be called a spiritual fire. While fire may seem like an odd metaphor to some, God has actually used fire extensively in his interactions with humanity. For example, consider the flaming sword guarding Eden, or the tongues of fire above the apostles at Pentecost. Perhaps most impressive, God reveals his very presence with fire in the burning bush and in the pillar of fire guiding the Israelites through the wilderness. Because the idea of a spiritual fire has been abused in some false doctrines, it may be tempting to dismiss this metaphor, but you should not. The idea of a spiritual fire is not just a random metaphor or a convenient catchphrase. This metaphor was created by God's selection of the word zealous, and when you embrace it, you'll discover that it provides an appropriate and useful framework for understanding zeal.
All right, so I had no idea about the word zeal, meaning, the burning, the heat. And sometimes when you go through the Bible, it's important to look back at what those words mean. Can anybody think of another example where it's important for us to look back at what the actual meaning of
Love.
Love?
Yes, there's three, I think.
Three different types of love.
Baptized.
Baptism. What's baptism mean?
To immersion.
Yeah, the word itself means immersion, but today it's been construed into a million different things. So the word zeal actually meaning heat, to be hot or heat, is important to know. So why fire? Why does God use fire for? He mentioned several things here. The sword guarding Eden. That's something I've always thought would be really, really nifty and terrifying, to be walking through the forest and lo and behold, there's that flaming sword. Like, I don't know if we don't read of any accounts of anybody ever coming across it, but we know that's what it was put there for, was to guard against people coming into it. Now, we don't know where it is now, and it's clearly gone, but that's a pretty powerful. We know it was a real thing. We know it was physically a real thing, so that's a pretty powerful. Why a flaming sword? Is a sword not powerful enough? Why fire to lead them in the wilderness? When you think of fire, what do you think of?
Hot.
Burning. Okay. Burning, hot.
You can see it.
Can see it. Think deeper than that. Think about the sword.
Piercing. Piercing. You can.
Piercing. Yeah. Protection. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. Consuming. That's another one I put. Are you ever scared of fire?
It's out of control.
Yeah. Fire's out of control. You read of people that get burned to death. That's a terrifying thing. I don't think anybody would want to go that way. And people with that get severe burns and things like that. So I put when you think of fire, what do you think of? I put fear, respect. There's a respect for fire. Like you have a mutual respect of, you don't hurt me, I'm not going to hurt you. Like consequences. So we think about the flaming sword in the Garden of Eden. You think about Sodom and Gomorrah and destruction there. There are consequences that go along with fire, and things are destroyed. Misty?
It's also used in this method of purification,
Mm-hmm.
and also to bring like a sword to a sharp edge, to bring to an edge or a point. So there's a very valuable use to it in both sharpening our abilities, but also in purifying. And that's a powerful image that's used numerous times with fire in the Bible.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's also used as a judgment. I mean, it's not anymore.
Yeah. So regardless of which way you look at it, I mean, to Misty's point, metal's tough, but what can weaken metal? Fire. So regardless of how you look at it, when you look at zeal, it's a powerful thing, and so it should be a powerful thing. And fire, the same thing. Fire is a powerful thing. It can weaken metal. It can destroy forests. It can destroy buildings. It can do a lot of damage. It is something powerful and to be feared and respected. All right, so back over here on page 10, the warming up. In Luke 24:32, two disciples ask, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was speaking to us on the road, while he was explaining the scriptures to us?" What is meant by the phrase hearts burning within us? So before we answer that question, can anybody tell me what's going on in these verses, or do we need to flip over there and read that? Because if we need to, we can.
It was when Jesus was walking with them and they didn't recognize who he was after he had risen from the dead.
Yes, so Jesus has died at this point, and these two men, it mentions they were disciples. Does that mean they were apostles?
No.
No, what's the difference?
They were believing.
They were believing. So these two men are walking along the road, and what are they talking about? Yeah, they're talking about what just happened. Can you believe what just happened in Jerusalem? So they're talking about Jesus and what happened to him. Lo and behold, who joins them? Jesus. So they get to a city. Jesus wants to continue on. They want to stop, and they convince him to stop. So they go in. Nancy?
Well, on the way, he asked them what they were sad about, and they told him, and like, are you the only person that doesn't know what's going on? But then he started teaching them the scriptures, and that's what they were referring back to when he was talking.
Yeah. So he knows, he kind of plays like he doesn't know what's going on, and they call him one night. Like, how do you not know what's just happened? And so then they get to the city. They convince him to go ahead and stop for the night. And as they're eating, what happens? Their eyes are opened, and all of a sudden, so clearly something miraculous happened in there to where they weren't able to see and recognize who they were talking to. And then as they're eating, light bulb goes off, and they realize this is Jesus. We just are talking about how he was just killed and how devastating this is. And here he is. And what happens immediately after that? Disappears. He vanishes. So, kind of a little, he points out verse 32 specifically, but it's important to kind of know what's going on around that to get the full context of it. So, to the question, what is meant by the phrase hearts burning within us?
Well, obviously it's a spiritual thing, not a physical.
Yes and no. I don't think you're wrong. I think that's partly right. Misty?
I think maybe the way to look at it is when you're going to meet somebody famous, you get all excited about that. And so you're full of excitement. You're going to new concept, you're full of excitement, you want to share it. And they immediately went down to 11 and went back to Jerusalem. So there's a lot of, this passion that they were flowing, that they're going after. I mean, it's not just that it was all internal, which I think it was, but they're just so overflowing with excitement. You can see that in their actions afterwards.
Yeah, but did they know at the time when they're talking about this, they didn't know who Jesus was. So they didn't know they were meeting somebody famous at this point.
But when they made the comment, they were.
When they make the comment, they were, but they're talking about their hearts burning within them previously when they didn't know. Mallory?
I would say it's similar to what happened in Acts 2. Like that, when they were talking about how their hearts were pricked, it probably happened well before they ever said anything, and they're waiting. I mean, that's how conversations usually work. You wait until it's, appropriate. So they felt something. They may not have been able to put words with it until all was revealed. Just like, when you're hearing a sermon or you're talking to somebody, you can feel something, but the whole point is delivered, that you don't really understand the emotions that you're feeling when you're hearing something truly convicting or, wonderful or sad or whatever you're hearing. You can feel those things, but you may not be able to put words with it until the end.
Yeah, so I think there's bits of truth to all three of these. So I think you're right there that at the end, it kind of ties in with what Misty was saying, that burning clearly continued after that, because to Misty's point, they take off and go tell the apostles. Now, to Janet's point, I made a comment when she said it's a spiritual burning, that yes and no.
They started there. It started as.
I still think yes and no, and here's why. They didn't know who they were talking to. So there's a spiritual aspect of this. They don't know who they're talking to, but who are they talking about? Jesus. Who was Jesus to them? Yes. So there is a spiritual aspect to it where he's a spiritual leader. He is a spiritual, they're disciple. We read that they're disciples of him. So there is a spiritual aspect to it. But I also think there's a physical aspect to it as well, because it mentions they're sad. This is someone that they knew and that they cared about who has just been killed. So there's a physical aspect to it as well, where there's an emotional, physical sadness along with that, I'll say, spiritual letdown, so to speak, of, hey, our Savior was just killed. And at this point, and so that's what they're saying, was this not who we were burning? At the end, once he's been revealed, they're saying, was this not who our hearts were burning about? So that burning was already taking place before this end point when it's been revealed. But to Misty's point, the burning doesn't cease. Like, it continues on in there. And so there's multiple layers to it: physical, spiritual, prior to revelation, post revelation, where it doesn't slow down, and that burning and desire is still there. So good points, Paul. Anything else on that? Okay. God's use of fire. Well, let's read the basics of your spiritual fire first. So who'd we get to? Tony, we'll come up here to you. If you would, read the first two paragraphs there, and Amy, read the last two, please. And it continues over to the next page for a couple sentences.
To get the most out of God's metaphor, you need a basic understanding of the physical principles of fire. These principles are easily understood by considering the fire triangle. The fire triangle is a widely used illustration that depicts the three core components of every fire requires: heat, fuel, and air. And all three of these components are together in sufficient quantities, the chain reaction takes place, and the fire will naturally ignite. If any of these elements are taken away, the fire will just as naturally die out. The combination of heat, fuel, and air is God's formula for fire. Singularly, the spiritual fire of your zeal also depends on bringing together the right source of heat, the right kind of fuel, and the right kind of environment.
With these three elements in place, your zeal will ignite. Therefore, it's vital for Christians to identify the specific Bible concepts that serve as their heat source, fuel source, and environment for zeal. With these, every Christian can build a spiritual fire that will fulfill God's vision for a zealous people, and that will bring greater passion to their walk with God.
Okay, so back over to page 11, over here in the right-hand column. So we read he talks about this triangle of fire. What three elements are needed for a fire? Heat, fuel, and air. Or environment, same thing. You take away any one of those, it's not going to ignite. So getting over here into God's use of fire, and for time's sake, we're not going to flip over and read every one of these. Genesis 19:24. What happens in Genesis 19:24? How's fire used? Destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. That's another one of those things that, if you had a time machine to go back and see, that would be a pretty incredible thing to see. Is, of course, I don't know if you'd turn into a pillar of salt, but it would be a pretty interesting thing to see, like the destruction that because I mean it was wiped off the map, and with the fire and brimstone, like there was nothing left standing. So it goes back to what we said before about consequences, destruction, punishment, fear. All of those things are factored into fire there. What about Exodus 24:17? Okay. So it talks about consuming fire on a mountain. How powerful would that be to see? Like,
showing his glory.
Yeah, I mean that's a mountain on fire. Like that would be another powerful thing, and it didn't burn it up like the burning bush. All right, Numbers 11:1. Anybody got anything on that one?
He was angry.
Okay, so he's angry.
Due to the Israelites complaining, and fire came and killed some of them.
Yes, so it was some punishment, some warning in there where he's angry, he's upset with them, and as a result, fire comes and consumes them. All right, Song of Solomon 8:6. Kind of ties back to what we read about the two men. It's an emotional reaction. It talks about a fire burning from within. So back to what we talked about, the two men that were walking with Jesus. John 15:6.
Anyone does not abide in Jesus is gathered and cast into fire.
Okay, so it talks about withering branches, how they'll be gathered up and cast into fire and destroyed, which is a metaphor for Christians and people that aren't not Christians, but people that have fallen away or people that aren't Christians. All right, and then finally, James 3:5. Okay, what's it say? What's it compare it to? It says something specific.
Fire can burn like a forest.
Yes. So it describes it as a wildfire.
Yeah, a wild. Yeah.
So, but it mentions something in there about how small of a spark. Yeah. So a small spark can burn down a forest. That's the tongue for us, and that's a very true statement. And you think about, a lot of these wildfires. I think the closest one to us would probably be Gatlinburg a few years ago. How did that start? Anybody know? Kids throwing matches on the ground. One little wooden match killed 14 people and destroyed hundreds of millions of dollars worth of national forest from a little toothpick. There was one, I think it was New Mexico, a while back, where somebody on a gender reveal shot tannerite. Box of tannerite's about that big, and when you shoot it, it explodes. That right there started the fire down there. So the tongue is it's that match. It's that little bottle of tannerite that can burn down an entire forest if we're not careful. All right, so next Wednesday we will pick up on God, the ultimate heat source. Got that, Dustin? Cool.
For the heat source, the fuel was the city's assignment.
Right.
The environment where the people or the people.
Right.
I tried to write the process three.
Yes.
The heat is the glory of the Lord.
Yeah.
Fuel is the environment that's the children. So it's a signal before the launch. I'm not getting the kitchen something.
Yeah.
If you want to go ahead and mark number 870, 870 will be the song after the invitation tonight. Then once you have that marked, turn back to 847. 847, Bind Us Together. Bind us together, Lord, bind us together with cords that cannot be broken. Bind us together, Lord, bind us together, Lord, bind us together with love. There is only one God, there is only one King, there is only one body. That is why we can sing. Bind us together, Lord, bind us together with cords that cannot be broken. Bind us together, Lord, bind us together, Lord, bind us together with love.
I want to take just a few minutes before we leave tonight to offer up the invitation for anyone who may feel the need to respond. And what I want to talk about tonight, there was a movie, one of my favorite movies when I was a kid, that I'm sure Tony and Trey have probably seen this 1,000 times too, with Chris being as big a baseball fan as he is, but The Sandlot. So if you've never seen The Sandlot before, it's a baseball movie. Chances are you've heard one of a few quotes from it. "You're killing me, Smalls." That's probably the most popular quote from it that pretty much everybody has probably heard. But that's not the quote that I want to talk about tonight. There's a scene in the movie where the primary character, he's gearing up for this big face-off with this dog that takes their baseballs, and he's deciding whether or not to do it. And he has this vision while he's asleep where Babe Ruth comes out of his closet and talks to him. And in that, Babe Ruth makes a statement that has stuck with me all, over these years, that I think is a really interesting quote. He says, at the very end, the last thing he says to him is, "Heroes get remembered, but legends never die." And I've thought about a lot over the years. When I was a little kid, I didn't really put much thought into it. And as I've gotten older, I'm like, man, that's a pretty cool, pretty powerful statement, that heroes get remembered, but legends never die. So heroes is something that we talk about a lot. Everybody's got heroes. Maybe it's an athlete. Maybe it's a leader. Maybe it's a fictional superhero or something like that. But legends. So you think about a legend, and legends never die. That's a pretty powerful statement to make. And you think about, I'm going to say some names to you tonight, and I want you to just think about these names and think about how they compare. So Harding, Polk, Taft, any of those names ring a bell necessarily. I see some confused looks that are really kind of stretch and think there. But what if I say Kennedy, Lincoln, Roosevelt, Washington? Those names have a little more impact to them. And all the names I just told you are presidents. But some have a little more legendary impact that regardless of, I know who James K. Polk is because he's from Tennessee. So I've got to be, hang my hat on that. But most people probably have no idea that James K. Polk was a president. You think about, if I say the name Audie Murphy, outside of Tony and Trey, a lot of people may not know who that is, but most decorated soldier in World War II. But if I say the name George S. Patton, I don't think there's anybody in here that wouldn't recognize that name or know who that was. And was Audie Murphy a hero? Absolutely. Was George Patton a hero? Yes. Was he a legend? Without a doubt. So I say that as I've thought about this over the years, there's a difference between people that are famous, people that are popular, people that are heroes, and legends. And when you think about that, legends never die. For as long as there are historians, people are going to know who George Washington is. They may not always know who James K. Polk is or Warren Harding or some of those others, but they're always going to know George Washington. They're going to know Abraham Lincoln. I mean, they have their faces on the side of a mountain. So they would be considered true legends. So the thing I want to look at tonight, there's a lot of people we read about in the Bible. And there's a lot of people in the Bible that you could put into that legends category. But the one I want to look at tonight is one that we've talked about a lot lately. We had a whole gospel meeting on it with Bob that he did. He talked about David. And when you say the name David, David was a true legend. When you say the name Saul, everybody knows who Saul was. But when you think about Saul, and Bob really, kind of hit this point home in one of his lessons, when it came to physical stature, Saul was, heads and tails above David. When you had to, if you put a lineup up there and said, pick which one of these you think is going to be king, it's going to be the tall, handsome, strong warrior type and not David. I mean, even his own brothers didn't take him seriously as a possibility to be king. But which one of those went on to be the legend? Which one of those went on to be the greater man? What enraged Saul so much about David? The people chanting, Saul's killed his thousands, David his tens of thousands. So David clearly blew him out of the water. And we read of things like, and Brett brought this up on Sunday, we read of things, David's sin with Bathsheba. Probably, other than David and Goliath, probably the number 2 story he's most known for. But once it was all said and done, how is David remembered? How is this legend remembered? If you look at Acts 13 and verse 22, it says, and when he had removed him, he raised up for them David as king, to whom also he gave testimony and said, I have found David, the son of Jesse, a man after my own heart, who will do all of my will. David sinned. We know David sinned. We know he committed murder. He committed adultery. He did all of those things. He coveted his neighbor's wife. He did, and I believe that's what Brett touched on Sunday. He did all of these things. But at the end of it all, he came back to God. At the end of it all, he made it right. So my question I ask you tonight, keeping in mind that heroes get remembered, but legends never die. You may have some legends in your life that stand out to you in your spiritual life that you've encountered over the years. Maybe it's a teacher growing up, a preacher. Perhaps it's somebody in this room tonight that has really had an impact on you. My question to you is, and to myself is, who are you a legend to? Who do you have the potential in your spiritual life to be a legend to? Can you be looked at as a legend? Can people look at you? Will people be talking about you and remembering you after you're gone as, you know what? He was a good, faithful, godly Christian man. He raised his family right. She raised her kids right. She was a godly woman, always teaching class, always the first to help out. How will you be remembered? So when it's all said and done, will you have a legacy to pass on to your kids, to pass on to future generations? Or will you just kind of fade away? So what's the impact that you're having not only in your life and your family's life, but in those around you? So if you're not a Christian, the answer to that is unfortunately, a pretty simple one to answer. But the good news is we've got the baptistry right over here filled up, ready to go if you want to obey the gospel tonight. Or if you're a Christian that's said or done something, maybe you're not walking that path to ultimately lead you to heaven. The good news and the encouragement is we can look at David, a murderer, an adulterer, who at the end of it all is remembered as being a man after God's own heart. So you're here tonight. You're alive. The world hasn't ended. There's time to make it right. There's time to make that correction so that at the end of it all, you can be remembered as a man or a woman after God's own heart. So if there's anyone here tonight that needs to respond to the invitation, come forward as we stand and sing.
I'm happy today, oh yes, I'm happy today. In Jesus Christ, I'm happy today because He's taken all my sins away, and that's why I'm happy today. I'm singing today, oh yes, I'm singing today. In Jesus Christ, I'm singing today because He's taken all my sins away, and that's why I'm singing today. I'm praying today, oh yes, I'm praying today. In Jesus Christ, I'm praying today because He's taken all my sins away, and that's why I'm praying today. I'm happy today, oh yes, I'm singing today. In Jesus Christ, I'm praying today because He's taken all my sins away, and that's why I'm sharing today.
Want to keep the usual folks in our prayers. And real quick, after services, 2-minute men's meeting. Matt's got something he needs to discuss. Anybody else have anything that they'd like to?
Tim wanted me to say that Sunday we obviously have Jeremy and his family coming to town, Jeremy Nettles. Our Sunday morning class, Jeremy will be doing it. We're getting ready to start 2 Peter. He's going to do an overview of 2 Peter and I think Jude. I can't remember exactly, but Jude. Okay, Jude. So if everybody would read Jude, be prepared to discuss that, participate Sunday morning. He'll be doing an overview of both books, and then the next week we'll go back and start 2 Peter chapter 1.
Don't see anything else, and I believe Logan was down for closing. So, if Mark, please close in prayer.
Oh, we humble ourselves before you, thanking you for this day of life you've given us and measure of health has allowed us to come to this place, Father, and to open your word and to study and discuss it. I pray, Father, that we might always be humble when we come together to open your word, that we might always remember Jesus and the sacrifice that He made. Help us, Father, to always love Him for that, to love you for making provision for us. Father, we are grateful for all these things, and we know that these things come from the death of your Son on the cross. May we, Father, be wise, take advantage of what Jesus did for us there. And we ask you, please, be with those of our number of mentioned as being are sick or away from us. We pray, Father, for those the world over who are dealing with loss or dealing with declining health. We pray that your mercy be upon them all, especially those of the household of faith. Please have mercy on our souls. We ask this in Jesus' dear name. Amen.